Omar L. Harris, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have this chat with you today. As we were talking in the pre-interview, just getting to know each other a little bit, I think we have so much shared interest and passion around our main topic, which will be on servant leadership. Today, we're going to be focusing on ending toxic leadership, this idea of leadership 3.0, and servant leadership generally, and really how we can be servant leaders amidst the pandemic and just all of that related stuff. And I'm super excited to have that conversation with you. As we get started, I just wanted to share Omar's bio with everyone. Omar L. Harris is an award-winning best-selling author of 4 books, Intent Consulting LLC founder, and former general manager at GM in Indonesia, with 20 plus years of global pharmaceutical executive experience at Pfizer, Merck, Allergan, and more. As a Gallup certified strengths coach, team leadership thought leader, and entrepreneur, Harris is passionate about leading teams, high performance coaching, and inspiring future leaders today and tomorrow to adopt the servant leader mindset and stop toxic leadership behaviors. Based on building high performance organizations on 4 continents, Harris shares his team's leadership strategies and success stories in 2 new books, The Servant's Manifesto in April 2020, and The Leader Board, The DNA of High Performance Teams in June 2019. While working in corporate startup and entrepreneurial endeavors, Harris developed 20 team performance acceleration principles and a clear blueprint for servant leadership that any leader at any stage of their journey can adopt to improve and accelerate group success. Such a great background, Omar. It's such a real pleasure to have you here with me today. Anything else you would like to share by way of personal background or context with the listeners before we dive on in?
Well, I know the bio is a mouthful, but thank you for reading all that. No, I'm just a guy from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who had an opportunity early in his career to live overseas and really expand my worldview, and had an opportunity at an early age to begin leading people, and that's where my passion for servant leadership comes from, is understanding the real responsibility of leadership from an early age. And then now where I'm at in my career today, trying to help other young leaders understand that early on so they can make a positive impact right from the beginning, and don't be inspired by the wrong examples of leadership that we see every day in the halls of corporations.
Yeah, well, I really like that focus, because I do think so many people fall into bad habits or bad behaviors simply because they don't know any different, and they're just following the examples of what they've seen around them, right? They're looking to those models, and then they're trying to replicate it. And they see someone who's been successful in their career, who's risen up the hierarchy, who's in a leadership role, and they think, oh, I should do those things. And sometimes you glean, good insights from that, and you can have good mentors and such. But a lot of times we pick up bad habits. We pick up bad approaches to leading people that, as you mentioned, are toxic. And in fact, they hurt our ability to be successful as leaders and to be productive and to have people-focused, highly innovative teams. So catching people young, as they're new, as they're coming up, and helping shape their way of thinking and their expectations for what they hope to see from their leaders, but also how they hope to lead. I think that's really, really important. And for whatever reason, long before I ever knew the term servant leadership, that's something that I just I think I lucked out with the opportunity to be around some people to kind of learn basically the fundamentals of the philosophy and the practice, even though I didn't know all the terminology and I didn't know, all the background to it. And that's shaped me throughout my life. And so I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity early on. It's great that you are working to share that with people, really at all stages of their journey, including those that are young and just starting out.
It's the same for me. I was very fortunate early in my career to work for servant leaders who really, they were not hierarchical at all. They were really focused on development of young talent coming into the organization, empowering us, trusting us. And that was something that I wanted to pay forward. from that point on. That plus, learning about positive psychology through the strengths movement with Gallup, and then what I was reading, from all the luminaries and all the, the pantheon of business leaders, John C. Maxwell, Robert Rath, and all these guys, so Patrick Lencioni, you begin to put together a puzzle of a brand of leadership that you don't really see in the corporate world. Like, if all the thought leaders are saying this is how leadership should be happening, but you don't see it being exemplified anywhere, you're like, so are the thought leaders wrong, or
where's the disconnect, right?
Something is happening. And I think what I realized when I became a very senior leader myself was it is really hard to be tuned into people all the time when the way you're being measured and what's valued is not people development. What's being valued is only the bottom line or the sales growth or the whatever that number was. I remember being very disillusioned in healthcare companies where we didn't talk about patients. We talked about numbers. We never talked about patient impact. And I think that was where I was like, okay, I'm not going to lead this way. I'm in a healthcare company, I'm in a pharma company, and we're all about people. We're all about lives. We're all about, how can we prevent disease? How can we do these types of things? So I think that I really tuned into that because I think I was in healthcare as well to allow me to kind of inspire my mission and purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's such an interesting, question you raise about, that disconnect, and why don't we see more people espousing this? And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think even well-intended leaders who have every intention to try to be a servant leader, assuming, they've had some good models to show them, that kind of a practice and how it can be effective. Man, the way that most organizations set up reward structures and performance structures and evaluation, it really can put a damper on it really fast, even with the best intentioned people. And there's no question that, there's so much research, so much literature that shows if you're a servant leader, you're a people-centered leader that works on the development of your team, that will pay over time huge dividends, right? And it will produce greater results. You'll have better performance, you'll have more innovation, but it takes time. It produces sustainable high level of performance, but it takes time. And when we get measured quarterly and executives feel all that pressure, then you start to take shortcuts, right? And you start to focus on kind of carrot and stick approaches to getting people to do stuff without too much of a concern of even burning them out, because you're like, if we burn them out, we'll just bring someone new in to the team without even thinking about the costs associated with that. So if we can get people early to recognize the systems are kind of working against it, they're working against you as a servant leader, but if you can be committed to it, if you can really be patient with it and help to develop your people over time, the results are going to be tremendous, and it'll be well worth the effort. Initially, the effort up front is higher, but over time, there's a curve and it goes down, because as you empower your people and you grow your people and you help them to have autonomy, you'll end up freeing up more of your time over time to be able to focus on other people management issues, to focus on big picture strategic issues, and all of those sorts of things that a lot of times leaders don't have the time for, because they're constantly running around with like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to put out fires, trying to micromanage people, trying to squeeze out the last ounce of performance out of somebody so they can meet the goal or the objective or the KPI that's out there hanging over their head.
Well, the good news is actually, and when I talk about leadership 3.0, this is what I'm talking about, is that the incentive structures and what's being valued is shifting beneath our feet right now. So there's a concept called stakeholder capitalism. I don't know if you've heard this term, but stakeholder capitalism basically is a shift from the traditional method of measurement of shareholder capitalism, which is literally companies working for their shareholders, to a broader impact base, which is, okay, Stakeholder capitalism is about employees, about customers, about the community, about the environment, and also about shareholders. So now leaders are going to be measured on 5 different criteria, and you cannot deliver an impact on these 5 criteria being a top-down hierarchical leader anymore. So naturally, this is going to shift. And the reason why, I really believe that people should invest in their servant leadership acumen today is because maybe you're seeing the last examples of top-down leadership styles being successful. And if you follow that example, you're not going to be successful 10 years from now. So I think that really trying to help young people understand that this landscape is changing, the value structure is changing, and now is the time to really invest in servant leadership because it's an idea whose time has come. When it first came out in 1965, Robert Greenleaf was talking about servant leadership. The idea wasn't ready yet. The world wasn't ready for that idea. It was a great idea, but the world wasn't ready for that idea. But now I think in 2020, where we are today with the pandemic and virtual teams and the way of working and technology and the collaboration model, I believe that now this is an idea whose time has come in 2020.
Well, yeah, certainly back in the early days of Greenleaf's writing, I think that's absolutely true. But even recently, like it was probably 5-6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 10 years ago, I was having a fairly passionate, shall we say, energized discussion with an executive about these types of topics. And this particular executive, he just really had no use for it. And he's like, this is not, I mean, it's nice, but it's pie in the sky kind of stuff. And I shared even like one of Greenleaf's earliest writings, and he looked at that and he just scoffed. I mean, he read it a little bit, he scoffed, and he's like, this is ridiculous. Like, this guy needs to go and like actually lead an organization for a while, and he'll throw all of this garbage in the trash can. Now, obviously, that's just one person. But the point is, like, there's been a huge shift over the last 60 years, right? In terms of the nature of work, the type of work people are doing, the composition of our economy, all those sorts of things that have changed the landscape, as you alluded to. But we still have holdouts, and we still have people who are very firm and entrenched in kind of an old model, an old style. Over time, though, those people are going to transition out of the workforce. And then you have millennials and Gen Z workers who they expect this, right? They expect a leader who has their interest at heart, who will treat them with dignity and respect, who will empower them, who will coach them, mentor them, give them regular feedback. These are all attributes of servant leadership, and exactly. they're not going to be satisfied with the old model of work and just like go to this job where there's no real defined purpose or meaning, do what people tell you to do because they told you to do it, and grind it out, pay your dues, and over time you'll get opportunities. That's not a model that works for the younger generation of workers. They're going to vote with their feet. They're going to go start their own businesses. They're going to do gig work. And companies are going to be thrashing trying to find good talent.
Why work for you when I can become a YouTube superstar and work for myself? Like, so you really have to have a different value proposition for today's employees. And also, the other reason why the landscape is shifting is we're living in the most heterogeneous workforce in history right now. Different generations, different races, different sexes, different gender identification, different nationalities. So, and it's 60 years ago, 80 years ago, you were managing one or two types of workers who had very similar backgrounds. Now, with the heterogeneity of the workforce, you cannot use a one-size-fits-all approach to the workforce, these people. And that's why what a servant leader does and brings to the table is that individualization, that connection with each individual, the understanding of the team as a whole, and then the purpose, the higher purpose, which we're all working towards serving. And that's what connects people today. And this, once again, this is the reason why, if you think that this top-down toxic leadership style is going to remain, it's not going to. It can't survive because it's just not effective. And we look at surveys like Gallup's Employee Engagement Survey that basically says that only 60% of employees globally are engaged at work. It's not a surprise to me. I'm sure it's not a surprise to you, because you can see that if you're trying to use old leadership practices for a modern workforce, this is just not going to work.
Well, yeah, and you just referenced Gallup, so they in their research, they talk about the engaged workers, and it's way lower than people would hope. But then they also talk about the actively disengaged workers,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And the actively disengaged, that's even worse, because now you have people who are mentally checked out. They're like actively looking for other jobs while they're at work, and they're certainly not producing. They're not innovating, because they're not invested in any way. And so we have to do better to energize our people, to help them feel passion and mission and meaning in the work that they do. And servant leadership is not the only way to do that, but it's certainly one of the most powerful ways to do it. In my own research, I've done a lot of work around meaning and purpose in the workplace, and work as a calling, work as an opportunity to benefit society. These are the things that workers, increasingly the younger generation of workers, want, expect, and demand. And we just simply, we can't do it with the old model.
Not at all. Not at all. So I think that when you talk about the actively disengaged, like imagine like going through life and hating something you're going to spend over half your life doing, and how aimless that is, and how frustrating that must be. So you look at the mental health numbers in society, and how depression and anxiety are up at levels we've never seen before. It's all a part of the same causality. And that's why, leadership is also a calling. Like, I tell people all the time, don't aspire to leadership for ego-driven concern, because this is not about you. This is a much bigger responsibility than just serving your ego and feeling good about yourself. This is really about having a positive impact on those around you, and learning how to gain to increase your influence for others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've already alluded to it a couple times. So let's go down the path a little bit more about talking about servant leadership in 2020 amidst a pandemic context. We have increasingly virtual workforce. The landscape has been shifting anyways, but the pandemic has just accelerated the transition, in a lot of ways. So what does it look like today to be a servant leader? That might be different than maybe even a year ago or a couple of years ago.
Well, I think a year ago or a couple of years ago, servant leadership was kind of optional. It was another, like you said before, there's multiple ways to approach building high performance teams and building organizations and serving purpose. There's not just one way to do that. But now with virtual working, I think that it has to be in every manager's toolbox today. Because why? You can't micromanage virtual teams. The only way to succeed with a virtual team is to empower, trust, and support. And if you don't already have that mindset of supporting my people, which is paramount to working in a servant leadership context, you're going to have a lot of challenges with the pandemic. This is why we're hearing so many people checking out over incessant Zoom calls at all hours of the day. People working harder now than ever before, because their managers are on them trying to figure out what they're doing all day long. Because the manager is like, okay, I got to monitor my people, and I can't just go to their cubicle or workstation and see what they're doing anymore. I have to like text them, bombard them with text messages, and have Zoom calls every hour to monitor people's work. And no one's working. People are just on Zoom calls having incessant, circular conversations all day long. So it used to be something you could apply if you needed to, that might accelerate your performance. Now it's a must-have set of don't get past the term servant leadership. It's really about the behaviors, empowerment, trusting, supporting, developing, nurturing. These behavioral aspects of managing people and connecting with people is really what we're talking about when we say servant leadership. That's why it's more important now than ever before to begin to shift your behaviors towards more empowering behaviors that are really going to drive productivity virtually. because, working in the current status quo is not gonna really help get that done.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with that. Perhaps you can share a little bit from your own work history. You've been in executive roles in pretty high profile positions at big corporations. That's not always the context where servant leadership works particularly well, but it can. And tell us a little bit more about what you did and how you tried to create an environment where that style could work and where people could feel empowered through your leadership.
Well, I learned early on that purpose is much more powerful than myself. So I learned, having a purpose, having an inspiring mission is so much more powerful than looking up to one person and being like, I want to work, I want to do this for this person, win one for the giver. That whole mindset doesn't really exist anymore. There are those inspiring leaders you just want to work for and just you really believe in them, but it's not enough to connect every person to purpose. And when I became a general manager, this is what I learned, is because you have a sales force who's inspired by numbers. You have a marketing organization, which is also trying to drive the numbers, but everybody else, finance, HR, legal, IT, regulatory, all these other functions, numbers really don't drive them that way. And I realized very quickly that we had to, it was in Indonesia with an organization of over 900 employees, that wasn't going to cut it. Plus my leadership team was operating in silos. There was like Game of Thrones when I arrived there, really like different, the kingdom of HR and the kingdom of compliance, the kingdom of regulatory. It was very challenging. So I wanted to do two things. I wanted to break down the silos, and I wanted to create an overall purpose that everybody could connect to in the organization. So we had a 3-day offsite, and at the offsite, I worked with the leadership team to define our overarching purpose, which is bigger than just hitting numbers. The numbers will be a consequence of achieving our purpose. So the idea was, if we became the best place to work with the highest customer effectiveness, with the best digital technology, with the greatest reputation in the industry, the numbers will be a natural consequence of that. And I created 4 leadership committees with different, groups of leaders working together to create a purpose statement for their particular pillar of the mission, and then drive that down to the organization. And that connected the entire company behind this overall mission and purpose. Now, as you mentioned before, it was the first 2 years of this were quite challenging. My numbers didn't look great in the first 2 years. But by the end of the 3rd year, we'd grown 15%, our net sales, and our profits had grown 30%. So, which is one of the best results in the region I was working in. But if you would have just measured me in the middle of this journey, you would have been like, oh, Omar sucks as a general manager. When in reality, we were playing the long game, and we delivered significant returns in that long game for a variety of stakeholders beyond just the finance guys in the organization. So that's one example, live, living it, where I applied purpose to the organization, broke down silos, and then began to shift what I value, because your managers will value what you value. So if you get the opportunity to be a general manager or be a manager of managers, which I was, you have the opportunity to create a culture. And when you create culture is more powerful than anything else in business. If they say culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I think that's where servant leadership is about, a culture, creating a set of norms and a creative values that everybody can connect with, and then driving that forward.
Yeah, well, thank you for that example. I think that's wonderful. It takes courage to play the long game, doesn't it? Because I'm sure you're getting, in those first 2 years, you're getting a lot of pressure, both internally and externally, probably, and people you report to. And sometimes people believe in your approach, and they're willing to let you play the long game, and they're going to kind of have your back. But more often than not, they're not going to have your back. And so you just have to be courageous and step out into the unknown and be willing to try out and be consistent with, and to create this sustainable kind of a culture that you're describing. And it does pay off, whether it takes a couple years or whatever, depending on the circumstances, the context, it will pay off. because you're going to get the right people who align with the mission. You're going to get people who want to be there. They're going to have better interactions with all the key stakeholders and with the customers. And ultimately, it's just going to produce much better results if we can be committed to the long game.
And the other thing that was cool about this was the culture actually weeded out people who couldn't lead in that culture. So basically, leaders who didn't fit that mindset, who couldn't lead in this way, they had to lead the organization.
Yeah, they
So
self-select out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it self-selects people out. They didn't want to be in that environment. They wanted to be top down and command and control, and that was not my style at all. So they knew that they were going to have to leave. So that was really I never had to fire anybody. People just left on their own due to that. But yeah, to give an example of a practical example of the kind of things you may face in this as well is I can recall, I'm very empowering of my leadership team, and there was a conference call where I'd empowered my business unit director to be on that call and handle this. We were in the middle of a little of a crisis, and I wasn't on the call because I'd empowered my business unit director to be on this call. And my boss was like, "Why weren't you on the call?" I said, "Well, because so-and-so was on the call." So why do I need to be on the call as well? Well, in this organization, we want everybody to be, you participating is paramount to being active and engaged. I said, that's not really a definition of engagement, but if you want to ding me for that, that's totally fine. And you take those hits because at the end of the day, you playing, once again, I don't work for anyone in the organization. I work for my people. And I set that bar. So that's who I'm working for. I'm very clear on that in all of my jobs. I'm not working for my boss. I'm trying to make my boss look good. I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about my people who I manage and the people that they manage and really driving value ultimately to the customer. And I know that really works. And I've seen that happen in a variety of different contexts around the world. So I stick with it. Is it hard? Yes. But it's very, very, the returns are amazing when you can be courageous enough, as you mentioned, to stick with it.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Omar, it has been a real pleasure talking with you. The time has flown and we're almost to the end of our time together today. Perhaps I can have you back on at some point so we can continue the discussion. Before we end though, I just wanted to make sure I gave you the last word, give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, and share anything else that you would like to share before we close.
Well, thank you very much. Once again, I really enjoyed this conversation. It's great to be talking to like-minded individuals and to know that there is a coalition of us out here trying to make this status quo change happen. So that we can't get enough of us. We need a lot more of us out here doing this. So it's been a pleasure to speak with you. On my side, you can reach me. The best way is my website, www.omarlharris.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. But if you type in Omar L. Harris, you'll find me on Google. You'll find my social medias immediately. I've got, as I mentioned, 2 books out: The Servant Leaders Manifesto on Amazon and Leaderboard: The DNA of High Performance Teams. I recommend you pick those 2 up because it will help accelerate your journey to what we're talking about right now. If you read Leaderboard, you don't have to read 30 other books. You can read that 1 book and it'll really get you up to speed on where we are today. And if you read The Servant Leaders Manifesto, you will then begin to understand why this is so important and the mission of what we're trying to accomplish and how we're going to eliminate toxic leadership practices and why that's so crucial for us to do that together as managers and leaders and organizations around the world today. So thank you very much and look forward to hopefully having another conversation with you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time and the conversation we've had. I hope listeners will reach out, get connected with Omar, find out more about what he can do for you, check out his books. And as always, I hope everyone stays healthy and safe. I hope you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope everyone has a great week. Thank you.